Okay, so now to texture this can that we've created, we're going to go through basic UV unwrapping and material creation, and from there we'll move on to the lighting and the scene setup, and then actually get into the gist of all the product rendering tricks and techniques to really elevate your product rendering skill set. So first, let's go over to the UV editing layout, and from here we can first off tab out of edit mode and hide this reference image, and then with selecting the can here, I'm going to tab back into edit mode, and we can start creating some seams for our UV unwrap to follow. So if you look at the Red Bull can reference image very quickly, you'll see that the texture goes all the way to the top, just where the lip begins to flow over, and it goes all the way to the bottom, basically to about this section. So what we're going to do is mimic that. So if we hide that here, come back to our bottle, come back to our can, tab into it, we can start creating seams. So if you just click the edge loop there, come up to the top, and we'll just zoom in, Alt-Shift-click the edge loop underneath the lip. We can then create seams for the texture to unwrap around. So if we right click and mark the seam, you'll see that even when we click off of this now, we have this red line around those edges that we've selected, and that's going to act as this seam, or the place where the UV texture is going to unwrap to. It'll make more sense once we actually do this. So now that we have the seam marked, we can go over to the shading editor, and from here we're just going to start creating these basic materials and get started on all the other materials like the aluminium. So let's start off with the can selected, hitting new to create a new material. Let's immediately call this one Red Bull can, just to keep our scene a little bit more tidy. And from here you can either Shift A and search image texture and then navigate that way, or you can simply find your image and drag it in like that. Now from here I am going to be using the Node Wrangler workflow, so if you haven't already got that enabled, I'd suggest coming up to your Preferences tab, so Edit, Preferences, and then in your add-ons just search for Node Wrangler, and just make sure that one is enabled. Okay, so from here with the Red Bull can texture selected, you can hit Ctrl T, and that's going to add in a few nodes here, so the texture coordinate node as well as the mapping node. So right now the texture coordinate is using the UVs, so I'm just going to drag the color over to the base color, give that a moment to load, and as you can see the unwrap of this can is nowhere to be seen, and it's all over the place. So what we need to do right now is go back to the UV editing. Okay, now that we have added that texture in, you can see it's over here in the UV editing workspace, and we basically need to unwrap all of these faces in the middle to match up to this texture. So before we do that, I'm just going to change this to material preview. That way we can actually see what we're working with. And as you can see, this is definitely not unwrapped, and we need to get to work on this. So first off, I'm just going to select any one of these faces in the middle of the can, and we're going to use that as a base for all of the other faces. So let's select this one. I'm going to go right click UV unwrap faces, unwrap, and you'll see that that's unwrapped the face and made it very uniform to the center here. So now that we've got that face unwrapped, with it still selected, I'm going to press Alt and Z to go into X-ray mode. I'm just going to go to the side view here with 3 on my numpad, and with Shift selected, I'm going to box select basically all of the faces that I want this texture to be a part of. So everything up to that red line that we created earlier. Now that's all selected, you can see that we've got all of the faces over here, and we're missing this one in the middle that we initially unwrapped. So we basically want all of these faces here to follow the same unwrap method as this one that we selected earlier. So as you can see, it's still selected here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, and in the UV context menu we're going to click on Follow Active Quads. So the long and short of it is they now all have the same UV unwrap, and it's going to work much nicer when we're actually lining all of these quads up to this square here. So let's start doing that. I'm going to, with all of this selected, I'm just going to rotate it to the correct orientation. So it looks like this way is correct. So I'm just going to go 90. There we go. I'm going to bring that up here. And already you can see it's kind of coming together. So I'm going to scale it down and basically just match it up to the square here. Okay, so we're almost done. I'm just going to scale it up on the y-axis. And that's a pretty good unwrap there. So I'm going to leave it as is. And yeah, as you can see, we now have a very nice unwrap of the Red Bull can. So for all of the other bits of this can, like the top here and also the bottom, we're actually going to make that aluminium or sort of like a scratched metal texture. So we don't need to worry about that right now because we're going to assign a completely new material to it. So let's go back to the shading workspace, and from here we can actually start adding in a little bit more detail to the Red Bull can, but we'll also enable that metal material on the top and the bottom. So let's start off with the metal material. So to do so, we're just going to come over here to the slot menu, and I'm going to create another slot here and basically create a new material for it. So this is going to be called, so let's just call this one metal. And to actually apply it to the can where we want it to be applied to, we have to go into edit mode and basically select everything but this middle section where we've applied the Red Bull texture. So let's just start off by, at the bottom here, I'm going to Alt-Z for X-ray mode. I'm going to select everything up to that red line, and with that selected, I'm going to come down here to slot 2. We're going to click Assign, and now you can see it's given the white material here, and if I was to change the color, you can see it's going to change on the fly. So that's pretty cool. Now for the top of the can, we're going to do the same process. Come up here, Alt-Z for X-ray mode. I'm just going to select everything like so. There we go. Come down to slot here, and then I'm going to assign that as well. So now you can see it's looking a lot nicer. Basically looking like the Red Bull can now. But I want to make this more of a metallic material. So first thing that we can do here is we can change the metallic to 1, which is going to basically make it metallic, and then from there we can start playing with the base color. I found a sort of light gray works pretty well for this. That's looking a lot better already. So for the metal, basically you're just going to decrease the roughness so it's a little bit more shiny, and then I'm going to play with the color just a tad bit more. Something like that seems pretty good. And that's basically the metal material completed. So I'm going to mirror that onto the can, to the top of the lid, and also these other objects here. So now I'm just going to apply the metal material to all of these guys. So I'm just going to click on him, come down here and click on metal. And a quick way to just add the same material to these last two objects, you can just select them both and then shift select the metal material as the last material. Hit Ctrl L on your keyboard and you can link materials like so. There we go. So we've basically got the can created here, but we want to really improve this material here for the Red Bull texture. Right now it's very bland and it's not even metallic yet. So let's first off change the metallic to 1. That's immediately going to increase its look and make it feel more like a Red Bull can. But from there we can add in a few other cool textures and tricks to really sell that this is a real product. So first off, what we're going to do down here is we're going to add in a noise texture here. So Shift A, and we can search noise texture. I'm just going to plop that one down there. And if we move the factor into the roughness here, give it a second to load in, you can see it's basically adding in some noise to the material, and some of the parts are a bit more rougher than others and it looks a little bit nicer, but we can definitely improve it. So what I'm going to do is first off I'm going to link I'm going to move this out of the way and link this vector to the vector here. There we go. And then from there, I'm just going to add in an RGB curves node. So if we just hover that over this connecting line, it's going to automatically connect it for us. And basically what this is going to allow us to do is really crunch the noise texture in and make it look. So I usually like to just crunch it down here, and it basically gives it that warping effect. Something like that usually looks pretty good, so I'm just going to leave it as that for now. So you can kind of see it stretching the reflection. In my opinion, that looks more like a can already. So before we continue, there is still a couple more things that we can do to really elevate this thing. So firstly what I'm going to do is add in some fingerprints. So I've just drag and dropped the fingerprint texture in here. If I control shift and click it, you can see it's basically just a bunch of fingerprints here. So now to mix these two together into the roughness of the can, I'm going to add in a mix RGB shader. So if you just shift A, type in mix RGB. It says top one here. You can just basically connect the two, and you'll see immediately there's a little bit more realism on the can. So it's currently displaying fingerprints as well. Depending on how much fingerprints you want on this can, I mean, you can make it as a factor of 1 to have only the fingerprints enabled, and I mean that looks pretty unrealistic, so I'm just going to switch it back to 0.5, and I'm just going to change the factor here to add, and basically that's just going to change the way it's interpolating, and it's going to make the fingerprints texture additive. So before we continue, there's one more thing that I'd like to add here. So the final thing I'm going to add to this texture is some smudging. So in the assets provided, there should be a smudges large overlay. So I'm just going to drag that in. And then from here, I'm just going to connect that up to the specular. So with that added in, it basically gives another layer of detail. I'm actually going to add in an invert node. What that is going to do, it's going to invert the color and basically change the way this looks. Feel free to not include this part. If you don't like this rough, dirty look of the can, more than free to just take all of this and delete it. Or you can even just select it all and press M on your keyboard to mute it, and then play around with the texture yourself and change it as you would like. I find that this makes it a little bit more dynamic. Okay, final thing we can do here is we can actually add in an HDRI to our scene. And that's basically going to give us real world lighting. So you've come over here to the world tab. You can actually click on the background, hit Ctrl T, and that's going to load up this environment texture for you. And from there you can just open up the environment texture Photo Studio 1, and that'll change the entire lighting of the scene. Okay, so I've just loaded that in now. And nothing has changed yet because we haven't actually moved over to the rendered view. So what I'm going to do is press Z on my keyboard, come up here to rendered. So now we have real world lighting to go with our Red Bull can, which is pretty cool. So you can see all of the reflections are interacting dynamically, and it's looking pretty awesome. So from here, we're going to move on to creating the lighting setup, creating the infinite backdrop for the Red Bull cans to sit on, and then also starting on the product animation side of things.